And I'm also going to enable the live transcript. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Adele Fitzgerald. Oops, one thing, sorry. Okay, hi. Sorry, my name is Adele Fitzgerald, and I am the Electronic Resources Librarian at St. Joseph's University in New York. And on behalf of the NASIG Continuing Education Committee, I'd like to welcome you to a special Equity and Inclusion Committee presentation titled Ms. Categorized, Gender, Notability, and Inequality on Wikipedia, presented by Francesca Tripodi. Before the presentation, I have a few quick announcements. This webinar will be recorded, and anyone who registered for the webinar will receive a link for the recording via email shortly following the webinar. There'll be no need to share slides, as all the information you need will be included in the recording. If you have any questions for our presenter during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A box, and we will save time at the end to answer them. During this question and answer period, you may also raise your hand and we can unmute you so that you can ask your question directly. Finally, when the webinar is over, please take a few minutes to fill out our survey and let us know how we're doing, what we could do better, and to share your ideas for future webinars. And with that, I will introduce our moderator for today, Xiaoyan Song. Xiaoyan is the Electronic Resources Librarian at North Carolina State University. She's serving on the NASIG E&I committee and has been responsible for coordinating E&I webinars for NASIG. I will now turn things over to Yan. Thank you.
Thanks, Adele, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Before I introduce speaker, I just want to remind everyone of the NASIG Code of Conduct. NASIG is dedicated to providing a harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, age, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, and economic status. Along this line, it's important to begin by sharing the norms for today's session. Listen to understand first, assume best intention when someone says something, and sit with discomfort. All right. With that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Francesca Tripodi is a sociologist and media scholar whose research examines the relationship between social media, political partisanship, and digital inequality. She is an assistant professor at the School of Information and Library Science and a senior researcher at the Center for Information Technology and Public Life at UNC Chapel Hill. She holds a PhD and an MA in sociology from the University of Virginia, as well as an MA in communication, culture, technology from Georgia University. In 2019, she testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on how search engines are gamed to drive ideologically based queries, a subject that is the focus of her forthcoming book with Yale University Press titled The Propagandist Playbook. Congratulations on your new book, Dr. Tripodi. She also collaborated on an interdisciplinary team funded by the NSF to study culture and complexities of search literacy and uses web scraping to examine patterns of gender and racial inequality on Wikipedia. Her research has been covered by the Washington Post, the New York Times, the New Yorker, NPR, the Columbia Journalism Review, Wired, Slate, The Guardian, and the Neiman Journalist Lab. With that, I'm going to pass the baton to Dr. Tripodi.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And really thank you everyone for being here today. It's exciting to share my research with y'all. For the last decade, I've been using ethnographic methods to better understand how communities use platforms in ways that are unintended by programmers. This exposes what many researchers refer to as socio-technical vulnerabilities. And using sociology theory and methods, I've explored how apps like Yik Yak silence marginalized opinions and how search engines are manipulated for political gain. But today I'm going to talk in depth about a research project that consumed the better part of my life for about 5 years, gender inequality on Wikipedia, and how biographies about notable women are regularly categorized as non-notable and nominated for deletion. For those of you who are listening today that might be on Twitter, I hope we can connect. I've posted my Twitter handle here, and I encourage you to live tweet this talk and connect afterwards there as well. So Wikipedia is one of the largest databases of information in the world, and it's a resource that can be accessed for free and edited by anyone, anywhere. It's truly a global accomplishment created by the people for the people. And in peer-reviewed studies published in journals like Nature, scientists found that Wikipedia is remarkably accurate when compared to traditional sources like Encyclopedia Britannica or professionally edited databases maintained by the National Cancer Institute. The peer production site has the same levels of accuracy. Nonetheless, Wikipedia also has a gender problem, and much scholastic work demonstrates the extent of gender inequality on Wikipedia. So Wikipedians refer to this as the gender gap, both editorially speaking and content. Internal surveys of the community find that male editors make up an overwhelming majority, with estimates ranging between 70 to 80%. And research studying the persistence of gender inequality on Wikipedia have found that women are reluctant to edit because the interface is not readily accessible. They refer to this as a broken pipeline for participation. Myself and other scholars have also noted the hardships women face when editing Wikipedia, documenting the need to consider safety risks involved before editing certain topics or entering contentious spaces. And women in all fields are underrepresented. So this is the content gap. Articles about women's interests are underdeveloped and are more likely to feature gendered language like first female mayor or wife of so-and-so. Of the 1.5 million biographies about notable writers, inventors, artists, engineers, and academics on English language Wikipedia, women make up less than 20% of those represented. Now, to try and close this gap, editors who colloquially refer to themselves as Wikipedians have organized editathons. These are day-long events that encourage new editors, often women, to add articles to Wikipedia, often about women. And while editathons do not exclusively revolve around closing the gender gap, there are entire networks of volunteers who use events like editathons to spur awareness, and they are specifically devoted to adding women to the site. A great example of this is Women in Red. That's a group of editors who are committed to improving systemic bias on Wikipedia and focus on creating content regarding women's biographies and issues. Their name, Women in Red, derives from the practice of turning red links, which are pages that don't yet exist on Wikipedia, to blue, which represents an active page. And since 2015, Women in Red has increased the percentage of women's biographies on the site. It was at events like Editathons that my qualitative research began. I first conducted hundreds of hours of ethnographic observations at Editathons from 2016 to 2017. In addition to these meetups, I also attended 2 large-scale Wikipedia events, smaller meetups like happy hours, 2 regional chapter meetings, and I supplemented these observations with in-depth interviews with 33 individuals, 23 Wikipedians, and 10 new editors that I met at events. It was through my ethnographic observations that I learned about articles for deletion, colloquially referred to as AFD. So AFD is a process where Wikipedians can examine articles under scrutiny, add to discussions about the merits of the article, and determine whether or not it should be kept, deleted, or merged to an existing article. This AFD archive is open to anyone, and it's a searchable database. Now, the important thing to understand is that what to keep and what to delete on Wikipedia is actually fraught with contestation, and it's drawn around reputability of sources used, the political nature of the subject, whether the article was written in a neutral tone, or if the subject is worthy enough for inclusion. Now, deletionists believe that articles that cover obscure content or do not have significant attention weaken the encyclopedic nature of the site, while inclusionists favor more of a long tail approach to Wikipedia, given the nearly limitless space constraints of the internet. It's also important to note that deletions are sometimes really important because harassment, doxing, and incredibly horrible stuff gets put up onto Wikipedia a lot. And editors do a really great job of doing that janitorial work to make sure that the site stays clean and isn't creating biographies about people as a form of harassment. However, research on deletions reveals that the most frequently used rationale for deleting an article has less to do with deleting defamatory content and more to do with notability. No indication of importance is one of the most frequently cited reasons for deleting, and deletions due to non-notability classification have increased over time. So, some of you might be wondering, well, how do you really establish notability on Wikipedia? Well, Wiki notability means that the topic or the subject has received significant coverage in reliable sources that are independent of the subject, what Wikipedians refer to as notability, WP:"note. Significant coverage means more than just a trivial mention. Reliable means a source that holds editorial integrity, for example, newspapers or books written about a person or subject. And independent of the subject means that it excludes works produced by the article subject, for example, like an ad or a press release or an autobiography. I don't know if you can see that in the screen share. Another way editors can evaluate Wiki notability uses what Wikipedians refer to as the search engine test. So as an act of good faith, editors should search for a topic and attempt to find reliable sources before deciding whether or not an article is notable enough for inclusion. And it's important that these criteria are used, right? Because a lot of people actually try to exploit the popularity of Wikipedia. It's regularly one of the top 10 visited sites, and people know this. So sometimes non-notable people will try to drive attention to something. So for example, if I was creating a donut shop in my local town, I might try to create a Wikipedia page about me, claiming that I'm the most amazing donut baker in the whole wide world. And doing this would, when people searched for things like donut shops in my area, return my biography, and then people would say, oh, we should visit this donut shop. And that's not what Wikipedia is, right? It's an encyclopedia, not a yellow pages. But my qualitative data revealed that women were also frequently deemed not notable, even if they were meeting Wikipedia's own threshold for inclusion. That even articles that were well cited were deemed non-notable, or people who quickly passed a search engine test were subsequently nominated for deletion or denied inclusion. So this is what happened to Lois K. Alexander Lane. Lane founded two museums, the Harlem Institute of Fashion and the Black Fashion Museum. She wrote a book, ran two boutiques, designed her own clothes, and not only did her museum memorialize the contributions of extremely prominent Black stylists, including the work of Anne Lowe, who designed Jackie O's wedding gown, Lane used the space to give free classes, not only in the role Black people played in creating the fashion industry, but she also offered classes in writing, English, mathematics, and African American history to some of the most poor communities in New York. When she died in 2007, the Washington Post ran an obituary detailing her accomplishments and credited Lane as a prominent figure in the history of fashion. In fact, her archive was so extensive, it is now on display at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Despite Lane's professional accomplishments, she did not have a Wikipedia page until 8 years after she died. Through data matching, I found that this biography was created during an edit-a-thon designed to increase coverage of African American women on Wikipedia. According to Edit History, her biography was deemed not notable enough to be included on the site. Her submission on March 19th, 2006 was denied. But when I analyzed the state of the original article through the page's revision history, it was clear that the preliminary entry included basic biographical and professional information, as well as links to credible sources that were independent of Lane, including the Washington Post and the Smithsonian Archive. As an act of good faith, editors could have easily searched for more about Miss Lane, because a lot of the information I learned about her prior to her article being declined was through a simple Google search of her name. This is also why Donna Strickland, the physicist who invented a technology used by all high-power lasers in the world, did not have a Wikipedia page when she was honored with the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2018. When a biography about her was created 4 years earlier, it was flagged for a speedy deletion and erased less than 6 minutes after it was created. Now, some editors have pushed back on this example, claiming that the content was plagiarized. Unfortunately, this original content is not available for analysis, but one could very quickly argue back that shifting the syntax is just as easy as removing the page altogether. Indeed, classifying women who have achieved great accomplishments as inadequate for inclusion on Wikipedia actually fit a trend that was documented in my qualitative data. During interviews with established Wikipedians outside of Editathons, frustrations regarding misclassification were palpable. Not only were these people volunteering their weekends to organize and attend events designed to improve the coverage of women on Wikipedia, but they also had to devote a substantial amount of time to make sure the article would survive, actually, after it was put up. Margaret, a passionate female editor in her 20s who regularly organizes editathons for improving coverage about women, described in an interview how an article she created about a feminist activist was categorized as non-notable and pushed into AFD only a few hours after she published the biography. She told me in an interview that many claim AFD is one of the most sexist male spaces on Wikipedia, and that this is problematic because it's where a lot of the discussions happen about whether or not an article should stay up. Her frustrations were echoed in a separate interview with another editor named Brenna, who volunteers much of her free time to adding women onto Wikipedia and volunteers on editathons to help new editors learn the ropes. She said that when she tried to create a page about a woman who pioneered the radio, it was quickly nominated for deletion. Within a couple of hours, she told me, it was flagged for deletion because they, on the talk page, were like, she's not a notable figure. Why is she important? I don't think this is worthy of Wikipedia. Brenna went on to describe how it felt like she had to work twice as hard to improve that the content she was trying to add was valuable and worthy of inclusion. This observation was also echoed by Matt, an editor who spent much of his time in AFD discussions and had conducted his own informal analysis of what he saw being nominated for deletion. He told me that topics that deal with women generally or biographies in specific seemed to be more scrutinized when he compared them against similar sort of biographies to men. So I kept asking Wikipedians in interviews to show me the articles that they were referring to. And it became clear that some of these were actually created while editathons were still happening. As the subject and focus of an editathon, it seemed to me that their status in their respective field, whether that be STEM or art, should have been easily recognizable because these events often partner with libraries. So biographies are well cited because librarians will pull sources for these events ahead of time so that people can quickly add their citations. Yet Wikipedians I talked to described how they would add articles they helped mentor to their own watch lists to ensure that they would stick around after the editathon was over. When I asked Wikipedians why they felt the need to watch over new articles, I learned from Janet an academic in her mid-50s that encourages classroom participation to improve women's biographies, said that it was common for women being added at these events to be immediately flagged for deletion or sent to AFD, where they would experience further sexism. And the sociologist in me just kept wondering what was happening, right? Why were biographies that met Wikipedia's own notability guidelines being nominated for deletion? And more importantly, was this happening to notable men too? Or were women more likely to just be considered non-notable subjects? In order to test if what I was seeing at Editathons was happening on a broader scale, I first had to identify like what it actually was that I was witnessing. What I was witnessing at Editathons were notable women being nominated for deletion, even if they were meeting the criteria for inclusion, but this phenomenon did not have a name. So if I wanted to get to the underlying question, I had to think of something to describe this. So I began referring to this process as miscategorization. And I focused explicitly on nominations that received a keep in discussion because they met Wiki notability criteria. Or in other words, biographies that didn't belong in AFD to begin with, or what I jokingly refer to as whoopsies, right? So to study miscategorization more explicitly, I partnered with a data scientist who wrote a script that scraped all articles for deletion daily log pages on a specific day, month, or year, and then linked it to an open index from January 2017 through January 2020. I then partnered with another computer scientist who data matched using Wikidata to identify the gender pronoun of these subjects. And for those that were not available on Wikidata, we did a manual analysis of these AFD links to see what pronouns were being used in the discussion about whether or not this person should belong on Wikipedia. I then ran a statistical analysis on all biographies nominated for deletion over a 3-year period. So this was a total of over 22,000 biographies nominated for deletion. I used descriptive statistics to determine the percentage of nominations that were miscategorized, and I relied on a chi-square analysis to test the proportional significance of my sample. Now, based on existing studies that were already out there, I tested the following hypotheses. One, that the proportion of biographies about cisgender women identified in my data set as pronouns like she, her, hers, nominated for deletion each month will be greater than the proportion of available biographies about cisgender women on Wikipedia during the same time period. My second hypothesis looked exclusively at miscategorization, and I believed that cisgender women were more likely to be misclassified as not notable than articles about cisgender men. So if the process of nominating articles for deletion is not biased by gender, then the percentage of articles about women nominated for deletion should account for roughly the same proportion of available biographies about women on English Wikipedia. And if no gender bias exists, the percentage of oopsies shouldn't vary, right? It should be the same. So my data set revealed that the proportion of women nominated for deletion each month was much greater than the proportion of available biographies about women. So here's a rough data set of the biographies available on English Wikipedia. The dark green represent men, the light green represent women. And as you can see, networks like Women in Red have made a difference, but there is still a long way to go in terms of creating a significant impact. So from January 2017 to February 2020, the number of biographies about women on English language Wikipedia rose from 16.83% to 18.25%. And according to the latest figures that are available on the Women in Red Wiki page, this percentage has recently reached 19.25 as of May 9th, 2022. So there is still progress being made. It is still under 20%. Yet, the percentage of biographies about women nominated for deletion each month was consistently over 25%. Some months it was much higher. So for example, 41% of the biographies nominated for deletion in April 2017 were about women, but at the same time, only 16.93% of available biographies on Wikipedia were about women. So even though women still make up less than 19% or less than 20% of all available biographies, they routinely make up a quarter of the biographies nominated for deletion on any given month. Like I said before, I also wanted to really focus in on this idea of miscategorization, right? Is there a gender bias when it comes to assessing notability? And again, I was focusing really on that, like, whoopsie. So if no gender bias exists, the percentage of miscategorized women would be equal to the percentage of miscategorized men. But if cultural beliefs value one gender as more worthy than another, which sociology theory does suggest, then the percentage of women categorized as non-notable, but subsequently kept for inclusion, would be higher than the percentage of men categorized as non-notable. And again, my data indicate that women's biographies are more frequently miscategorized as non-notable compared to men. So on average, 19% of all biographies nominated for deletion are whoopsies, if you look from January 2017 to February 2020. But roughly 25% of women's biographies are miscategorized, whereas only 17% of men's tend to be miscategorized. The statistical significance and real significance of these observed differences in my findings support the patterns that I identified during my ethnographic observations. Once again, kind of putting a nod out there to the fact that qualitative data is in fact real data, regardless of what the statistics say afterwards. Wikipedians trying to close the gender gap have to work nearly twice as hard to prove women's notability. And this means devoting extra time to track the biographies they create to ensure that notable biographies about women are not subsequently deleted. Now, you'll see on this chart that on a few occasions, I could not reject my null hypothesis. So for example, the proportion of miscategorized biographies were equal between men and women in October 2018 and November 2018. I'm wondering if anyone out there has paid close enough attention to try to figure out what might have been behind this temporary shift in equitable assessment of women's notability. But I got to kind of thinking, like, what is the significance of this short time period? And it's interesting to note that it was shortly after Donna Strickland won the Nobel Prize in Physics. She won it on October 2nd, 2018, that news outlets began covering the fact that a notable woman had been targeted for deletion on Wikipedia. And a lot of news flooded there shortly thereafter. But unfortunately, what I refer to as the Donna Strickland effect was short-lived, as women were once again more likely to be miscategorized as non-notable for the subsequent 6 months. So what does this mean? Well, it means that biographies about women who meet Wikipedia's criteria for inclusion are more likely to be considered non-notable when compared to men. And because women's biographies face additional hurdles to remain active pages, it requires additional resources and time from groups or persons committed to closing the gender gap. More importantly, I think these findings shed light on how women's contributions to society are still contested in the 21st century, and the extent to which a person's gender impacts their perceived significance. As my qualitative and quantitative data demonstrate, the problem of underrepresentation on Wikipedia runs deeper than simply missing pages or missing editors. So not only are Wikipedia's notability criteria a barrier for women, right? Women don't get covered in the news and they aren't prominently featured in art galleries. What my data demonstrate is that even women who are meeting these stringent guidelines for inclusion are still more likely than men to be considered non-notable and nominated for deletion. I think it's important to note, right? Wiki notability is not static. And discussion surrounding a subject's perceived significance is not inherently good or bad. Now, and also debate surrounding notability could in fact be productive, as has been documented in other research findings. It could in fact improve the article. But my findings indicate that women in general are just simply seen as less notable subjects, especially when we take into account that our purported significance is easily verifiable using a search engine. So overall, my research suggests that a person's gender is being used to make snap judgments regarding their perceived relevance. And such a finding indicates that gender discrimination is multi-layered. Of course, some can and some do interpret my data to conclude that more keeps mean that the mechanisms of Wikipedia are working, right? They're like, what are you talking about? They were saved. Yay, it works. And while that's true, right, a keep decision means that a biography was saved from deletion. It also means that editors trying to close the gender gap must be on standby if they want a biography they create to persist. It supports a narrative that women's biographies need to be saved if they want to stay up. And even content added and protected by established networks like Women in Red can still be deleted. So the Women in Red archive alerts indicate that a significant number of notable women have already turned back to red, meaning their page no longer exists on Wikipedia. And this means that even when systems are designed to ensure that notable women are kept, are put into place, they're bound to fail if women are disproportionately considered non-notable to begin with. These setbacks have ripple effects, because even if just a few notable women are mistakenly deleted, it poses significant hurdles for closing the gender gap. And this was also documented in the history of Women in Red's main page. One example I demonstrate in my paper is that on February 19th, 2018, the percentage of biographies about women rose to 17.9%. But only a few weeks later, Women in Red editors noted that these biographies the team had added had been deleted. And so that statistic dropped back down to 17.53. It took editors devoted to closing the gender gap 17 months to get the percentage of women biographies back to 17.9%. Well, volunteers already devote hundreds of hours organizing events, identifying notable women, pulling sources that demonstrate their notability, and ensuring that biographies about notable women are kept adds to the emotional labor and time it takes to decrease the gender bias, making it feel like a never-ending climb. This additional work may also contribute to more editors quitting Wikipedia over time. And if an editor wants to cast a keep vote for a miscategorized article, it means participating in AFD, what respondents in my study refer to as very sexist space. So if they want to participate, they have to participate in interactions in which they may not feel safe. And in fact, many of the editors I interviewed felt so uncomfortable in AFD, they did not participate in discussions of biographies, even if they were invested in their survival. So if the survival rate of notable women subjects is dependent upon editors placing themselves in situations where they don't feel safe or volunteering extra time to an already lengthy process, then I would argue the system in place is not sustainable. Now, some of you might feel like your reliance on Wikipedia is like pretty low anyways, and so this missing phenomenon of women is not such a big deal. But I do want to add that Wikipedia plays a huge role when it comes to how we access information in the era that we're living in. It helps make up Google's knowledge panel. So it's teaching Google when you search for notable notable authors, right? How Google knows what to pull is dependent on what's available on Wikipedia. It's also teaching AI systems. So virtual assistants like Alexi and Siri are trained to do their jobs using Wiki data. And to get one of those coveted blue checks on Twitter that verifies your identity and also subconsciously signifies your importance is contingent on Wikipedia, right? Because you have to demonstrate that you're a notable person. And one of the ways in which you establish that notability is by providing link to a stable Wikipedia article about you. So that means one that isn't constantly contested regarding its notability. As we can see, devaluing the significance of women's subjects holds wider implications than just Wikipedia representation and provides a broader understanding of how women's accomplishments are evaluated. My findings enhance and expand upon reputable research demonstrating how Wikipedia's evaluative mechanisms for inclusion are unequivocally connected to gender bias. But my research also replicates the results of experimental studies conducted over 60 years ago, which shows that men are more routinely considered worthier and more valuable than women. My research also calls attention to the limitations of pronoun use. When gender clearly shapes perceived notability, whether explicitly or implicitly, we have to consider the ways in which his/her dichotomies maintain those hierarchies. And while I didn't get an opportunity to discuss in depth today, my data also indicate that LGBTQ+ biographies are more likely to be classified as non-notable, despite meeting Wikipedia's criteria for inclusion. And my data suggests that some may be repeatedly targeting LGBTQ biographies and nominating them for deletion. Most importantly, my research documents the real struggles women face day to day to be seen as notable subjects, and highlights that when women go missing from Wikipedia or when their notability is questioned, those absences reverberate throughout the 21st century, impacting nearly every way we might learn about their accomplishments. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to engaging in discussion with you all.
Thank you so much, Francesca. This is a very useful, great, eye-opening research. First time I heard, but well, not first time, but first time in-depth kind of on this topic. So I do see some questions coming. One question is, are you considering any further research on minority men or BIPOC and or LGBTQ group?
Yes, absolutely. So right now I actually have a paper under review at a journal that looks at how notability is disproportionately assessed along lines of race and gender. So we look at this using Google search specifically. So we're focusing specifically on academics whose H indexes demonstrate notability and whether or not those are used as an adequate predictor of notability. So more to come. The other issue though, unfortunately, when we try to test proportionality and statistical significance, is that there are just so few articles written about non-white people. And that not only does Wikipedia have a gender problem, it clearly has a race problem or a whiteness problem, in that so many of their articles are written about white people. So and that's also why I wasn't able to test the statistical significance about targeting of LGBTQ plus biographies, because there were just, I think out of the 22,000, there were 10, you know? So, and they were all nominated for deletion. And so trying to understand that in the context of like, thousands and thousands made that more challenging, but 100%, this is definitely an issue that I'm trying to tackle next.
Yeah, that's just really, upsetting, but encouraging to hear you're going to do more research on this one. So just in thinking about, what we can do to close the gender gap on Wikipedia, right? You talk a couple of things during your presentations. One question comes in is about, would it be helpful if we have more female editors in this case?
Sure. I mean, I think anyone that wants to get their hands dirty and edit Wikipedia should. I I think networks like Women in Red are really fantastic. And there's also GLAM, which looks at women in art and museums and galleries, right? Libraries. And so there are these networks out there that are actively trying to close the gender gap. So I would suggest, if you are interested in this subject, to first connect with these networks, because they can show you how to write a Wikipedia article. They can help you create your username. They can help mentor you through this process. And so, since you all know that the page that you create might not stay up, it also will hopefully encourage you to go back, right? You can star a page after you create it. That adds it to your watch list. And then you can make sure it's not going to be contested. And so that way you can kind of keep up with it and make sure that it stays a viable page after putting in that content. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of just improving existing pages. So the work of a lot of really important, mostly women researchers have shown that women's biographies are just underdeveloped. So there's a lot of stuff out there that meets kind of the bare minimum requirements to keeping it a page, but we need a lot more information up there. So yeah, you can add to that too.
Great. Let's see. I think there's a couple of other questions. Here's one. Thank you for your presentation. This is exactly what my grad students from the attendee. Grad student I experienced me writing papers for notable women, pages for notable women's Black LGBTQ archivists with a grant I received. I felt the frustration all over again. We're currently revising a paper for publication about our project and the many barriers we faced while we stress Editathons and the need for more women Wikipedia contributors. We also believe Wikipedia needs to take ownership of these problems. So what are some of your suggestions that Wikipedia, or more specifically its board of directors, can take to make the site more inclusive?
Yeah, so that's such a tricky thing. The interesting thing, so there's really a couple things. One, you have like Wikimedia. So first of all, Wikipedia itself is like a semi-anarchic volunteer project. There's very little editorial oversight that exists. There is the Wikimedia Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization committed to free and open source information, which like hosts Wikipedia. But the editors and the admins of Wikipedia itself are not beholden to the organization's recommendations. They can actually just be like very easily disregarded or repealed. This happened when initially they got feedback, right, that it was really challenging to edit Wikipedia because it was kind of like an HTML format. And so they created this like WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, kind of like a WordPressy way of editing. And they rolled it out, and the editors at large didn't like that and wanted them to learn how to do it in the same way, and didn't like that it was a default. And then there was this like mass kind of protest, right, in terms of how that was. So like holding someone responsible is really challenging because it's like not how it works. I mean, it's specifically not how it works because there's no like bureaucratic structure. That being said, there are a lot of like very influential Wikipedians who are excited and open to working with researchers. So I would suggest like reaching out to the Wikimedia Foundation about the research that you're doing, and also touch base with prominent editors inside these networks, right? And tell them what you're interested in doing or what you're finding, because actually I'm giving a presentation to Wikimedia tomorrow, right, about this research. And so they are very like open and excited for scholars to be demonstrating the extent of this problem, right? Because prior to my research, you had hundreds of mostly women complaining to other editors saying like, these articles are being targeted for deletion, and they were kind of told that they were being too sensitive over their edits, or, you know, that it wasn't real, like they were being told it wasn't real. And so if you have systematic evidence that demonstrates that reality, I found that editors and the foundation alike are super excited to have that information.
That is great to hear. Wikipedias are open to the suggestions and some conversations on this topic. That's great. Having conversation, is always a good start. There's another question specific about the editing process. This is a participant who actually participated in an editathon. They were trying to create a new article for a female librarian who's also a person of color. Every time I address a concern of a wiki editor, it still comes back as insufficient. I even borrowed a book of oral history, including interview of these particular librarians, and the citations are not considered good enough. So the article is still in pending status. So what else can I do to address this notability issue?
So send me an email, because this sounds like a very specific case.
Right.
And I can try to connect you to the people inside Women in Red that I correspond with about trying to keep these active, because unfortunately, I can't prove from my data set what's implicit versus explicit, right? I didn't interview those who made these decisions, so I can't say with scientific certainty, but I do know that there is a pattern in terms of the username of individuals who tend to repeatedly deny entry women, claiming that there's insufficient. That's the same thing that happened to Lois Alexander Lane, right? The exact same story that you're saying. Someone wrote their page, tried to put it through the processes of inclusion, and it was deemed not notable, insignificant sources, etc. So if you feel comfortable reaching out, let me know, and we can try to connect and figure out what this page is, or you can send me the link to the page, or you can even put in Q&A with if you feel comfortable, what the name of the page is that you're trying.
Okay. All right, I'll let this person handle, attendee handle how they want to move forward with that question. But that's great that you will be in touch on that one. And then there's another question is about, do you have any advice on how to do it safely? In a way.
Sure, that's a great question. So one thing that they bring up at Editathons in terms of protecting safety, a big thing is your username. So I don't actually edit Wikipedia because I study Wikipedia. It felt like a conflict of interest. So my user handle is the same as my Twitter handle. So you can very easily identify who I am. But your Wikipedia username, if you want to participate as an editor, women suggest that you use usernames that do not link to your offline identity, and also don't indicate any kind of feminine undertones. So for whatever that means to you, having a username that is like gender neutral, quote unquote, or even more masculine sounding, as well as not linked to your offline identity. And then I think the other thing to consider is certain spaces tend to be more contentious, right? So if you're new to editing Wikipedia, I wouldn't go to the Gamergate site or web page and start editing about content, or actually a lot of those pages are locked anyway, so new editors can't cite them. But I would say, writing about women who are notable shouldn't be contentious, right? So that should be fine. The problem is that if and when the article gets nominated for deletion, you might have to defend that space, and that is a different kind of environment. But if you're connected with really cool networks, they can help you navigate that process.
Great. So the attendee did share the page. She was the attendee was talking about.
Oh, excellent.
Is how do I say it? Louis Collins. Can you see that? Yeah.
I can. I'm gonna. I'm copying and pasting it right now
Great.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. I'm not still on screen share, am I?
No, you're not on screen sharing.
I just opened up
You're
my
fine.
email so I sent myself a message with this thing. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. Am I sharing my email to everybody? Did anyone have anything else they wanted to talk about? I tried to keep it sort of shorter.
Let me check, see Q&A. There's some comments, people say, yeah, now I wanted to be pick up and be a Wikipedia editor, you know, there's some actions going on there. So I do also have questions about, let's see, you know, there's some like, you know, regarding how Wikipedia they include and delete things. Is there any public available documentation on their process, local how decisions are made? Are there anything that we can learn and check it out?
Sure, right. I mean, so the articles for deletion process, it's pretty open. I mean, you can go to the article for deletion database and you can see all the articles being nominated for deletion on any given day, and it's all archivable. So you can see what that's looking like in any given day. And also, not all the articles nominated for deletion are biographies, right? Some of them are like, you know, soda can or something like that, just silly pages about nonsense. So not all the pages are necessarily relevant, but you can get an idea. But how the nomination process works in general is that anyone can nominate an article for deletion. You tag it with a very specific tag, which you can see that from Wikipedia. And then a copy of the page gets put into articles for deletion and with that tag. And then the articles for deletion are typically up for about 7 days. And during those 7 days, anybody can participate in that discussion. And so they're looking at the merit of the article and trying to determine, should we keep this page? Should we delete this page? And also during that period, people can improve that page, right? And so they can improve the page and then vote on it. And then typically an administrator, although I think not only administrators can close the discussion, but in my observations, this has typically been an administrator who is not participating in the discussion. So they have to be kind of like a third-party arbiter. They come in and they assess like how many keeps are here and what are their arguments, how many deletions are here and what are their arguments, and then they render a decision about whether or not the article will be. And there's a whole bunch of, I mean, I siloed them into like keep, delete, or merge. But there's like soft keep, which means like sort of weak, soft delete, right? There's a very incredible range of final decisions, but ultimately they come down to whether or not it's going to be kept, deleted, or just like the content should be merged with an existing page. An example of that might be if I wrote an article about a player, a very non-trivial player in the soccer team in Washington, D.C. And then they might say, well, this player is pretty trivial, so we'll just merge their page with the team page for the Washington, D.C. soccer. I don't even know if they have a soccer team. Actually, that was a horrible example.
All right, let's see. Another question. I think this is the last one, will be our last one. Do you know of studies like yours on non-English Wikipedia?
Oh, that's a great question. There is some research that just came out by some researchers funded through the Wikimedia Foundation that looked at notability criteria for women in 3 different languages. I believe they did it in, actually, I don't know which languages they did it in. But I do know the Wikimedia Foundation is both sponsoring and conducting research internally on global Wikipedia. So, so I would go to their organizational website and then find more through that.
All right, that's great. I think that's all we have for today. And I want to thank you again, Dr. Chipotle, for this is a wonderful and very important research. And thank you so much for sharing this with us. I also want to thank everyone who come to the discussion and to listen to what Dr. Chipotle, the research. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
I had a great time.
Thank you so much on behalf of the CEC. We appreciate both of you. Thank you. And I'm going to stop recording.